13 years ago, I started medical school. 10 years ago, I quit. And this year, I earned my PhD. Hi, if you're new here, welcome to the channel. My name is Amarati. I recently earned my PhD in chemistry with a concentration in biotechnology. And in this video, I'll be sharing with you my slightly unconventional part and how I went from being a medical student to earning a PhD. Now, here's the thing. I thought I wanted to be a doctor for as long as I could remember. Maybe it's the very Nigerian thing where you have a conventionally intelligent student and everyone just assumes, oh, you're going to be a doctor. It's the A student to doctor pipeline. I don't know. But growing up, I always had this thought that, you know what, I want to be a doctor. But thinking back, I also realized that underneath all of that was this strong push to help people. That really was the driving force. Of course, now that I'm much older, I now understand that my view of helping people was very, very limited. Maybe it had something to do with exposure or just, the country that I was in at that time. I'm Nigerian. I grew up in Nigeria. And when you think about helping people, or at that time when I thought about helping people, there were very limited options, I thought. So in my head, I thought, you want to help people, you're conventionally intelligent, you're like always top of your class, you should go to medical school, become a doctor. And that's exactly what I did. Of course, my family encouraged me because, the Nigerian stereotype. I only have like 3 or 4 professional options for what you can do with your life: doctor, engineer, lawyer, accountant. I fell into one of those buckets. It was very easy, in quote, and very straightforward. So I went off, I applied to medical school, and I started medical school. So just before I turned 18, I left Nigeria, moved to Europe, to Hungary specifically, and I started medical school. I was very excited, of course, to start. I had a scholarship. It really was a once in a lifetime opportunity. I was pretty excited. But just a couple weeks into my first semester, I realized, okay, I don't think this is really working. I don't think that this is what I want to do. But then I psyched myself, like I said, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. I was on a scholarship that a lot of people dreamt of having. I thought, oh, there's no way I could quit this right now. And then I was like, you're only just starting. So I thought, just stick it out for a bit more and see if things get better. It did not get better. There were many problems with med school. For one, the content was just so dense. That bit was expected because I went into that program, just with the mindset that, listen, you're going to med school. Med school is hard. I did not expect it to be easy. Never expected that. So I already had that mindset, but even with the mindset, it was still way more challenging than I could have ever prepared myself for. The content was so dense. But for me, the bigger problem, the reason why I just couldn't get through it really was the educational system, more specifically, the examination system over there. So it's very different from anything that I had been exposed to up until that point. Growing up in Nigeria, all of my exams were written exams. You study, you take a test, you get your grades. In Hungary, it was different. So a lot of my exams were oral exams, and I don't want to go into the details or the dynamics that play into that, but that different educational system was such a hassle for me. It was such a challenge that I just couldn't really get through that. And then of course there was a cultural aspect. I was pretty young. By the time my first semester was done, I was 18 years old. I was living in a new country by myself, no family, no friends. I made friends eventually in med school, but I came to that country alone, no family, no friends, completely new way of life, new way of being, new language, new people, new weather, new food. All of these things contributed to making my experience a lot more challenging than it truly needed to be. Now looking back, I realized that my classmates who were slightly older ended up faring a lot better than I did. Most of us were like 17, 18, 19, but we had a couple people who were maybe just 2 years older than us. And now looking back, those people ended up faring a little bit better. So there's obviously the aspect of just your life experiences and maturity that play into your experience in medical school. At least it did for me. So now looking back, I realized that that was also a challenge. Anyway, although I already knew from the first semester that this was awful and this was probably a mistake, I stuck it out. I stuck it out for 3 years. And now when I tell my American friends that I was in med school for 3 years, they're like, You were just 1 year away from finishing. Why didn't you just finish it? I'm like, no, I wasn't. I was halfway through. Med school in Europe or in Hungary was a 6 year program. But by the third year, I was like, no, I just couldn't do it anymore. And at that point, the stars aligned, and what I considered to be a perfect opportunity to quit presented itself. And that's exactly what I did. I let go of it. I washed my hands clean of med school. I said, you know what? It's okay. I've had enough of this. I quit medical school after 3 years. Because I already knew I was going to quit, I was already planning for alternatives. Again, I'm Nigerian. I couldn't have just quit without the plan and then sat at home twiddling my thumbs. That could have never, ever, ever flown in my mother's house. Absolutely not. So I looked for alternative options. I switched to chemical engineering. I moved cities, moved to a different university, all of that, got into a chemical engineering program. And when I tell you, I had the time of my life. Chemical engineering was so good to me. This new university, this new way of learning was so good to me. And, I breezed through it, finished right on time, graduated with a first class, top of my class. By the time I finished my chemical engineering degree, I started thinking in of what I would do with my life. A couple different incidents eventually led me to the path of potentially pursuing a PhD. And that's exactly what I did. I applied to PhD programs in the US. I got into a couple. I ended up picking my program and I started that. And I did the PhD. The PhD was challenging. I'm not going to lie. It had its own challenges. But one thing I would say is my experience in medical school really helped a lot. Not the actual learning material. I mean, my experience with failure, with challenges, with putting in a lot of work and not necessarily seeing the commiserate result. All of that really helped me mentally through my PhD program because I had already come face to face with failure in med school, right? We're very familiar with each other. So when things weren't going so well in grad school, like during my PhD, I was like, you. I know you. I've encountered you before. You're not going to break me this time. And I didn't. So I finished the PhD not without challenges, but I was able to overcome those challenges. And, I came out on the other side. I'm now on the other side. I'm just rambled through the last 13 years of my life, career-wise, in this short video. And now that I'm on the other side, of course, I'm happy that things ended well. But I want you to know that when I was quitting medical school, there was a lot of uncertainty there. When I started studying chemical engineering, there was a lot of uncertainty there. Because I had struggled so much in med school, even when I started chemical engineering, I still doubted myself, right? But then as I saw the results of my hard work start to pay off, I started to feel a lot more confident. And then a similar thing happened as well when I started grad school. The first 3 years of grad school were awful. My project wasn't working. I was like, okay, all right, here we go again. But then eventually things turned around and stuck it through. I got to the end. People don't really talk about their failures a lot. And I personally never even felt comfortable talking about my failures in med school until after I had, in quote, succeeded in chemical engineering. It wasn't until after I had that degree in my hand that said, look, you graduated top of your class, you graduated with a first class. That was when I came out on the other side of, I guess, the shame that I felt, and I felt more comfortable talking about, my not so pleasant experiences. All this to say, if you're going through a phase of life right now and things are not working out, you're feeling like a failure, please hang in there. Please hang in there. If you feel like you're doing your best, hang in there. If you feel like there's an alternative viable option, also consider pursuing that option. Don't tie your worth, your status, or, your sense of self to this thing that isn't working or this thing that hasn't been working for a while. And it's okay to fail. Until before I got to medical school, I had never failed in the sense of it. Actually, I had never failed at anything. Like I said, I was constant top of my class. A student from day one, top three, first, second, third, consistently, junior head girl in school, senior head girl in school. I was always the star student, and med school just completely turned everything I knew about myself on its head. It truly, truly broke my spirit. But here I am many years later with an equally successful story. If I let that failure of med school stop me from trying again, I would have never come to this point. So if you're at that point where you're so weary, your spirit is broken because you failed, please stand up and try again. Keep trying until something works out for you. It's so interesting though that although chasing titles was never the goal, it was never, I never went into med school just because I wanted to be called a doctor. Neither did I go into grad school or pursue a PhD just because I want to be called a doctor. But I cannot ignore the irony or the fact that somehow I've still gotten to this point where my title is doctor, but the path that it took to get here is completely different. Life can be very interesting in that way sometimes. All in all, I'm here to tell you that not every detour is a mistake. The life you end up loving may not resemble the one that you imagined for yourself, and sometimes the bravest decision that you can make is changing your mind. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it has brought you some sort of comfort or encouragement. If you liked the video, please hit the like button, subscribe if you're not subscribed, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.